After a great many years of having my house on a private well in my front yard, the village finally decided to run a water main down and make village water accessible. Because my well wasn't in very good shape and the aquifer was drying up in my area, it made sense to switch over to the village water. I documented the procedure, and for anybody else who might be going through a similar process, here were the steps involved in doing mine. The village came out and started to dig out the ditches on the far side of the road from me in order to prep for putting in the water main. Then the company that was doing the installation brought out all the fire hydrants and water main pipes and got them all connected. The next step was for the contractor to install buffalo boxes, otherwise known as bee boxes, in everybody's front yard. They use a horizontal boring machine to put the water line under the street from the water main to the bee box in each person's yard. The bee box is just an underground valve buried about 5 feet or so below the surface, which is where the water has to be to prevent freezing in the middle of winter. And I am in a northern climate, so some other areas may have their lines buried considerably shallower. But what I ended up with was a excavated area in my front yard with the shutoff valve poking up through the surface of the dirt and going down to the actual bee box valve 5 feet or so below the surface of the ground. I hired a plumber excavator who came out with a crew and a small backhoe, and while one crew went to work excavating a trench from nearly the front of my house out to the bee box location, and by the way, the excavation did not go all the way up to the house because I have a row of bushes in front, and they were going to use another technique to get under that. Anyway, another crew was working inside to jackhammer through the basement, and my particular basement is only about halfway underground. About half of the height of the basement is above ground, and the footing of the foundation is just under the floor of the basement. And they figured out that with the water line trenched 5 feet below ground, by the time it got to the basement, that was going to put it just under the footing of the foundation. My house is pretty old, and it does not have external drain tile as far as I can tell. It appears the drain tile under the basement floor is just inside the foundation footing and just about below it, so any water seeping from outside under the footing would immediately go into drain tile. And the drain tile is clay, and as was expected, the excavation of the basement floor did crack into the clay drain tile, as you can see here. This was not a big problem. It was anticipated, and there was a plan already in place to remedy that after the other work was done. The hole in the basement floor that was excavated wasn't very large, maybe a couple of feet in each direction, and it only went down a few inches, perhaps 6 inches below the footing of the foundation, as can be seen here. The 5-foot deep trench in the front yard was pretty stable because I'm in an area with a lot of clay, so the ground is pretty firm and not too likely to cave in. But there were still some basic precautionary braces put up in the areas where most of the work was going to be done, basically at each end of the trench. And as can be seen in this photo, the bee box was exposed at the end farthest from the house. And as I mentioned before, the bee box is just a small valve with the pipe coming under the street from the water main coming in one side, and then my new pipe will continue from that valve and go on through the trench into the house. The bushes in front of my house extend about 5 feet out from the foundation, and they excavated the trench to about a foot short of the bushes, so there was about 6 feet of soil to go through to get into the basement. And my plumber elected to use a pneumatic mole, which is sort of a horizontal jackhammer type device which self-propels itself through the dirt, pushing the soil out of the way, and it's powered by a high-powered pneumatic air compressor, which pulls a pneumatic air hose behind it, and it just makes its way through the hole, and eventually it poked its way into the hole excavated in the basement. After that point, I'm not sure how they do it, but they did something to cause the mole to start backing its way out, and it finally ended up back in the trench in front of the house. The water line that's run underground in the trench is made from soft or ductile copper of the type K, which means it's the thickest available wall, which is required for such things as burial deep underground and in other areas where it needs to be extra robust. The water line was laid in the trench, and one end of it was swaged and fit with a compression fitting to the B-box valve. This is a requirement since no solder joints are allowed underground according to code. And then the line was fed through the hole produced by the pneumatic mole under the foundation footing, and then it was bent up through the excavated hole in the basement floor. And after the hole was backfilled with pea gravel and the line insulated with plastic insulation where it passes under the concrete foundation, and this is required for corrosion protection, then it was swaged to a shutoff valve on the top. While this was going on inside, the backhoe was backfilling the trench on the outside. Actually, a pressure test was done first before burying the line. The water was fed through and made sure there were no leaks. But then the trench was refilled and some topsoil was put on top, even though it was anticipated that it would settle quite a lot. This was just for temporary cosmetic reasons, and some grass was planted on top and then given, at least several months to settle before more topsoil is added and the grass replanted. But the location of the B-box valve was, or the shutoff valve rather, was marked so that it wouldn't be accidentally messed up by the backhoe. The plumber had a couple of guys who repaired the drain tile on the floor using plastic pipe up to the points where the clay had ended, and a new floor drain was put into the drain tile, and this is mostly for clean out and inspection, although any water that leaks in could run into there and go out through the drain tile. And then the whole area was filled in with concrete. That was enough work for one day, and the plumber came back another day, a few days later, and with the concrete cured and set up properly, he installed the new water meter, which is, in my case, read by radio from outside the house. All the village has to do is send a truck down the road with an antenna and they pick it up. And then the plumber ran new copper line over to the location where my well came in and separated the lines so that there was a total segregation between the well system and the village-sourced water system. And then we ran a bathtub for about an hour to completely flush out the line. And then we installed the new water filter for the village system, which maybe isn't strictly necessary, but I like to have it there. And the picture shows the filter for the well system, which looks very dark. It's really only iron buildup from the hard water. It's not really filthy. It's quite clean. It just has a rusty color that makes it look dark. The remaining thing to be done was to have the inspector out to verify the quality of the work, and then the village came out and inspected the meter connection itself and sealed it with wire so that they would know if any tampering was done. Basically, they're concerned that somebody's going to bypass the meter so they get water for free. My village allows continued use of the well for at least a couple of years because eventually the village water system is going to transition over to a new water source, and until that time, people can continue to use their private wells, although they cannot be cross-connected to the village system. So in my case, I'm keeping the well in service for doing some limited watering of my flowers in front of the house and so on.